Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Wild from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you for joining us for yet another session in the Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest, as always, for tonight is Sally OJ. How are you doing, Sally?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thank you. I thought you were very poetic just now, talking about the cold that seeps into your bones. It is as well, isn't it? It's one of those nights.
It
But
really is. It really
but
is.
it's lovely and cozy here, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's session.
I think it needs to be cozy here. I'm noticing. Yeah, I'm really. I think it's my age. There we go. Anyway,
That could be it. Yeah.
let's get started. Sal, tonight we are talking about research. It's a subject we haven't specifically tackled before, but it's something that comes up regularly. In fact, I was looking back on some notes on a recent session, and we went into some detail about research. And I just wondered, how much of writing a book is research? So someone who has an idea for a book and thinks that writing a book would be, they've got it in them. How much research do they need to be prepared to do?
Well, it really depends on the book, on the genre. It depends on a lot of different things. And, when we were talking about this before, I started off by saying, of course, if you're writing a fantasy book and you've created your own world, and, you don't really have to do so much. But as soon as I started to say that, I realized, well, that's not true at all, because in that case, you need to research the genre. You need to have a look at the kind of tropes you're using. You need to find out if anyone else has written a story about 12 elves who work in Waitrose. You still need to know your stuff. So, but traditionally, of course, people tend to think of historical fiction as being where you need to do, and I think we're going to talk about this in quite a lot of detail in a bit. But it's not just historical, it's any kind of book you write, any kind of book. And if you're writing right in the present, right now, you need to know your stuff. You need to know your quote. You need to know your times and places. You need to know who said what. I mean, outside, if you're, you need to know who was prime minister or what the capital of Belize is or any of these things. You need to make sure all your facts are straight. And it's terribly important, because if you get it wrong, then you are destroying your own credibility in the eyes of the reader. And once you've done that, you've lost people.
And so when you say, sorry, go on. I think I caught you.
Fine.
I was just going to say about getting it wrong. I mean, in your role as a book doctor, is that something you see regularly? Is it do a lot of manuscripts come to you that you can tell there are gaps in the research? Or
I mean, I think what a lot of people say things to me. I'll say things like, Clapham isn't the capital of Belize, and they'll say, oh, no one will notice, doesn't really matter. Well, it does. It really does. Obviously, I'm not talking seriously about anything that glaring, but little things. And it tends to be, one author, if they're a bit slapdash about one thing, they'll be a bit slapdash about another thing.
Right.
So it really is important. And I have actually managed to literally forget your question while answering it, Tom.
Okay, well,
which is a first even for me, I think.
Well, I mean, so the point hang on. So the point you're making is really about being disciplined. So, and you don't.
Oh, you said, do I notice when people haven't done it? I think was that.
That's right. So
yes, and it happens a lot. And I mean, it's a really obvious thing is medical stuff. Very often, especially if I'm working on a thriller or something, people, that I think I've used this example before about bodies.
Yeah.
It's disgusting, but people will immediately start writing about bloated bodies in the water, when in fact it takes quite a long time for a body to bloat. But even more basic medical stuff like injuries or heart attacks or stroke, or you can't busk that kind of thing. You really have to do it properly. And the good news is, as we were saying, not everyone can get along to the British Library. This is, particularly to do with historical stuff. Sarah Waters, lots of people I work with go to the British Library. They're able to do it. Not everyone is, but there's so much online. And There are specific websites which particularly deal with, medical procedures. I mean, there's the police procedures, the guy we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
There are websites that talk about the value of money then and now, going back a very long time. Also, there's anything you want is there online. You just have to make sure you're using a reliable source, because there's a load of old rubbish online as well.
I was going to say, so it's theoretically it's easier to do that research now than ever before.
Theoretically.
But the danger is there's a lot of
books. I urge you towards books. Getting books is better. Going to a library or getting a book about. And there's, we're doing this all back to front really, and it's my fault because I'm yabbering on. But a lot of books now are set back in time, even in the 80s, 1980s. I mean, not 1880s. Yeah. Because people are finding that technology is ruining plots. As my daughter famously said when she was about 3 and I was reading her story, why doesn't she just text him? And it was a princess in a tower or something, So it's important to a lot of people to go back in time, even to the 70s or 80s, to avoid that problem. And even if you go back to the 1980s, it's terribly important that you get things right. You can't mention Duran Duran in 1980. You've got to get it right. So one of the ways of doing this is to immerse yourself in things that were done at the time. Now, obviously, historically, you can do this with, say, Austen or the Brontes. You can read their books to get a sort of feel. Mm-hmm. But you can't really write like Jane Austen now. People wouldn't like it. We were talking this morning about if you write an historical novel, people want you to write in the way they think it should sound.
Right, this is a really interesting point you made earlier.
Yeah, because if you did write like Austen, it would just sound really odd. So you want to write sort of Austenese. Mm. But the key to an awful lot of research is to really immerse yourself in the period or the place or the time or the mood even that you're writing about. And one of the ways of doing this is obviously to read books that were written at the time, but also to watch, if it's sort of the 1940s onwards, to watch films that were made at the time, about the time. I mean, not literally about the time, but sort of contemporary films. I mean, I watched Blow Up the other day for reasons best known to myself, and which is set in the 1960s, but it's the things you notice in the background. First of all, it's the way people talk, and the vernacular and the way people speak, but also it's the thing, it's the stuff in the background, the things in the kitchen, the things the shops you see as they walk down the street. These are all things, if you really immerse yourself, say you want to write about the 60s, in this kind of thing, and books written at that time as well. When people are writing about World War II, I very often suggest they read, I think I might have talked about this before, an author who used to be a very well-known author, and he's not really known so well anymore, called Neville Shute, who wrote wonderful books. His most famous book is probably A Town Like Alice, but he wrote some wonderful books, and they're all mostly set in World War II or just after, and written at the same time. So you get the language, you get the details, you get stuff about clothes, but it's more about immersing yourself in that time. And of course, not just that, anything. And I think again, the internet is great. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there, documentaries and things that you can find. But
so, I'm just going to, sorry, I keep
you got me mid.
I know, and now I think I've just stopped you saying something really exciting.
No, carry on with. Just sink yourself into the time. That's all I was going to say, or the place. If you're writing about India or somewhere less exotic, I don't know, Dusseldorf. If you can't actually get to Dusseldorf, which please do if you can. But really read books. Go to YouTube and look at tours. Do everything you can. This is what you have to do.
Okay, and right, I've got a few things to cover here because number one, there's no shortcut, right? So really, you do need to immerse yourself, and yeah, okay. So a little bit of desk research isn't enough. To be prepared to devote a lot of time to this. I want to deal with a couple of points of housekeeping first. Someone's just said, can you ask questions now? Please do. The reason for you using the Q&A box as it is that you can ask questions. They don't distract Sally or I, but we will get to them at the right time, but please feel free to ask questions at any point throughout the evening. Thank you. Throughout the session. Secondly, I have just turned on, one of our participants just asked if I can turn on the subtitles. So I'm hoping they're working. Everyone can see them now. But apologies for not, I didn't even realize that was a function we could do live. So I hope they're useful. And thirdly, Sally, you mentioned a couple of times, some of these resources and sites that help with this. I thought it might be useful if I just add those links you sent me earlier. One is about a Facebook group that you have to kind of ask to join, but it's called Trauma Fiction, I think. So it's for fiction writers. Let me just add that. Who I guess are working in, writing stories to do with trauma. And the other is Measuring Worth, which is a site where you can basically look at relative monetary values from any period in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure the people here are going to have loads more useful sites, which I hope they will be sharing, as long as they're, really solid gold, reliable ones. Because like I said, there is a load of old nonsense on the internet, as we all know. Please share.
Yeah, please do. That's always one of the great things about these sessions. While Sally and I witter on, there's lots of really good quality conversations going on in the back channel too. So someone, in fact, Evelyn's mentioned...
I'm deeply offended.
You know me better than that, Sally. Evelyn has mentioned she watched YouTube videos of World War II and post-World War II Vienna.
Exactly. Brilliant.
It's a surprise at how much damage was still in the city. It took 10 years to recover. Okay.
Well, when I was a child, and I know this is difficult to believe because I know I look about 25, but I was born in the 60s. When I was a child, a young child, if I walked around London, visited London, there was still so much bomb damage. It didn't sort of finish after the war. Into the 70s, there was still so much bomb damage in London. And just these huge empty lots everywhere, or houses where you could see, where you could see the wallpaper. So there was sort of half a house and you could see the wallpaper in the different rooms. Absolutely commonplace still in the 60s and 70s. So people forget things like that. So it's good to have a look.
Holger has mentioned that when David Boieldieu wrote One Good Deed, he wore hats from the era on several days to get himself into the groove.
That is the spirit, Holger. Excellent stuff.
Brilliant. And there's some other great comments there. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Please continue to add those.
So listen, I have galloped wildly off with this topic. Pull me back to things that we have discussed earlier, because one of the things really valuable stuff.
One of the things, okay, this isn't necessarily so valuable, but I really liked your tale of it when you said earlier that one of the things that really annoys you is when you see shoulder injuries. So people, because it's it's potentially a non-fatal wound, but shoulder injury.
It's a kind of laziness.
Right.
I start to twitch a bit if I see a shoulder injury. And the thing is, it's such a cliche. And also, so there are several things. One is there are in fact lots of other places in your body that you can sustain a non-fatal injury. People go for the shoulder, I understand why. And it's because we all grew up watching films where people get shot in the shoulder. But in real life, if you look up shoulder injuries, you're not going to be dashing around and doing things. And, they're really, you can have, this, if you think about this part of your body and how, if you shatter your scapula, or if it's not funny. So these are the kind of things, if you give somebody a shoulder injury, make sure they're in real pain and really suffering from it. these are the kind of things you have to do. Do not be lazy.
Yeah.
And try and think of something a bit more original.
Right.
You know,
now
lazy have thighs, everybody. Focus.
Laziness, Sal. Let's pick on that, because where does research go wrong? You know, so people, we know we're human beings.
Like a video on YouTube.
Yeah. We're human beings, so we know we have a tendency to be lazy. It's very easy to kind of you know, to do the bare minimum, let's say. But where else does it go wrong? So you mentioned earlier that people can be quite, you know, sometimes writers can be quite blasé.
It goes wrong when people think it doesn't matter, is the simple answer. So as we were talking before, everyone knows if you are writing an historical book, you need to do your research. This is well known. But surprisingly, people will still try and busk that. You know, they'll do the significant research. I mean, I've worked on a book which was about the Second World War. They'd done the most acute research. They knew what the weather, they really genuinely knew what the weather was like on a particular night. But, you know, they'd forgotten all about rationing.
Right.
So, you know, so you have to, it's about being immersive, but you can't just pay lip service to doing research. You really have to do it properly. I once worked on a book actually that he'd done really serious research about the stuff that he was interested in, and the rest he just absolutely made up, and it was actually very good. And I said to him, I think what you've got to do is just put at the beginning, I've just made all this up. I said, I think it's going to be too difficult for you to go back and change it now. It feels authentic. It's a load of old rubbish, but it feels authentic. Just put at the beginning of the book, you know, actually most of this isn't real. I've talked before about, you know, I love Mary Renault. Any writer nerd will rhapsodize about Mary Renault for a long time, and especially to do with historical fiction. And I've said before that one of the things she used to do, and she did years of research, I mean years, and she wrote mainly about ancient Greek and Alexander the Great. But what she used to do in the afterword of the book, she was very clear. She said, look, I take you to this point in history, and then I pick up again at this point in history, and these are the things I know about. They were written about, they're documented.
Yeah.
There's this bit that nobody knows anything about, but I have tried to make a really educated guess at what might have happened. So it's not for sure, but I've, you know, put 2 and 2 together and tried to make a really educated guess. Another author called Patricia Finney, I think, says, I've made some stuff up. I don't know how they did that, so I've just made it up. So as long as, but her books are so authentic in almost everything else. So as long as you're clear about that, what you mustn't do is just think, I'll just fudge this.
Yeah.
You know, that's when you're in a lot of trouble, because I promise you there will be somebody reading your book who knows where the capital of Belize is.
And actually the chances are the people reading your book are likely to have more than a passing interest in
exactly what I said to you earlier, wasn't it?
Or archaeology, whatever it is. Yeah.
If people, you know, by default, usually, and especially, you know, readers of historical fiction, they get to know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Readers of First World War fiction, they get to know a lot of stuff. So they will notice and mind mistakes. They don't go, oh, whatever. They really mind.
So don't try and get away with it. Just be clear. If you are, you know, intentionally making things up, then you're much better off kind of being clear about that.
Absolutely.
To the reader. I think that's great advice. Really good advice. We've got questions absolutely piling up. And I just wanted to say, I mean, if people have examples of, you know, where maybe putting in an extra effort really paid off with research, or tales of the, you know, the extra lengths they went to for doing the research. I think Sally's go on, Sal.
I think we're about to say exactly the same thing, which is things that people forget about is diaries and letters from the period.
Right.
Certainly in the British Library, you can find those things, but they are available. You know, you can find books of letters, books of you know, diarized thing, you know, diaries. They're not hard to find. You just have to put in a bit of effort, because that will give you the voice of the time. That will give you details again. So spread your, you know, don't just think, oh, yes, I'll go online, or I'll go, you know, I'll get a book on World War I artillery. I mean, do that, for heaven's sake, do. But think of how you could widen your net as well.
And so I was also going to mention, you know, we've talked before, you've used a great example before of, I think it was one of your writers, you know, doing finding a Victorian keyhole to look through.
That's
you know,
right.
I mean, it's not necessarily spending out days and days doing something, but it's doing something that really gives you the perspective of what your protagonist would have had, or whatever.
Absolutely. And do act out, you know.
Yes.
But if you're doing in terms of research, yes, go to museums, have a look at things, you know, see if you can find out, you know, get a sense of the size of things, get a sense, you know, things were hefty in the past, you know, they were not delicately crafted. Usually they were hewn, they were hacked.
Yeah.
So get a sense of, and I'm only talking about the 1980s here. So you know, make sure you do just have to just do the footwork.
And like we were saying, you're seeing more, if you like, more and more novels being based in the past, partly because of, since the advent of mobile phones and the internet, it's kind of more difficult to come up with ingenious plot twists, or to get plot twists to work sometimes. And so research and is more, I guess it's more common to see research in areas that we're not familiar with, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
Let's dive into some questions, because, as I said, they're really mounting up. And there are some fascinating ones. I mean, so the first one, right, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you said, in my novel, I've got a main character who's Polish-American. I'd like to respect the authenticity of his culture, including some meals and Polish language use, and then perhaps cultural practices that are specific to a geographical location, which I'm visiting this week. Oh, that's good news. What are my options? Brackets, Google Translate isn't good enough for context with the language. I mean,
your only option is to find someone Polish, seriously.
Right.
And certainly before you sign the book off, you have got to ask somebody Polish to read it. And if you don't know somebody Polish, you've got to find someone. It is that simple. Otherwise, you know, and you know, there's a, you know, this is a huge issue at the moment, cultural appropriation, and God, I've forgotten, I know the phrase perfectly well, but getting a reader of the right place or nationality or culture to sort of read it to make sure it's okay is absolutely vital. It really is. And I think there have been times before when you would not have had to do that, but you do have to do that now. So by all means, do your research, go to a Polish restaurant, eat the food, talk to people, you know, go to the places, do all of that. But at some point, you're going to have to talk to somebody Polish, and you're going to have to get somebody Polish to read the book. Yeah, you really are. Absolutely.
There is no way around that. And people have said that, the same thing in chat. I would, you know, if you're on today's session, obviously you're used to signing up for events. I would find beta reader groups or other or just other writing groups. You'll come across, there will be, you know, people, there'll be, I'm sure you'll come across people that can put you into contact with Polish writers or Polish people that would be able to help. I just thought of something else, actually. Another place, if they're available, and they are available, but I don't know how you do this through universities, because I don't know how you do this, but people's PhDs are often really packed full of really interesting stuff. And it's also worth remembering that a lot of, well, not a lot of, but quite,
you know, Sarah Waters, for example, has got a PhD, and that trains you how to do
Mm,
research. So some people are ahead in the game of this kind of stuff. It's an advantage, an unfair advantage, but it doesn't mean you can't learn. Doesn't mean anyone can't learn and get better than people with PhDs. But people's PhDs are often on, you know, 14th century spoons from Lincolnshire.
yeah.
You know, so if you can get hold of, I know that sometimes they are available, they're published and available, and I'm afraid I don't know how, but you will know how,
Yeah.
our lovely listeners. So that's a very good way of finding out about things as well.
Fantastic.
Let somebody else do your research for you.
Yes, yeah, brilliant. Okay, so P Black, you have said, I have a character who has to call a trauma support hotline. I want to know how they answer the phone. What's the first thing they say to the caller? Questions they'd ask them. But I feel it would be disrespectful to call them pretending to be someone needing help myself, or to waste their time by saying, hey, I'm writing a novel. What do you say when someone calls? Same with seeing a therapist. Any direction? I mean, before you jump in, Sal, I'm just going to say that Facebook group would probably be a great place to start. Trauma fiction, I would have thought.
Yeah. I totally agree. Obviously, you can't call a trauma hotline and say, hey, can I ask you a few questions? I mean, obviously, and you're very aware of that. Most professionals will be, we've talked about this in other, to do with other things, will be delighted to talk about their job if you buy them lunch or buy them a drink, you know, or buy them dinner. But it's got to be done in quite a formalized way. You've got to approach them in quite a formalized way, and you've got to show your credentials. You've got to write a very careful email or letter. And the way to do it would often be, I mean, there will be a website for these trauma hotlines. Now, 9 times out of 10, to be honest, you're not going to get any, people aren't going to want to do it. I mean, I know I'm contradicting myself, but if you go through a website, they're going to think, oh, for God's sake. So, but it's always worth a try. And if there are other ways that you can, if you know people who know people, you know, ask on Facebook, ask on any writers groups, because if you can get through to them, people will love to talk to you. They really will. They want to. They actively want to talk to you.
Yeah, it's, and there we go. Holger's just said trauma fiction helped me within literally seconds. There we go.
Here's Holger.
Yeah. So, and we've mentioned Graham Bartlett before, who's a police advisor to authors. What amazed me when I started looking into Graham's background, there are quite a few people who do exactly that. You know, across, you know, all over the place. Lots of people, ex-professionals, who maybe they're writers themselves now, have got professional advice or experience that they're happy to share. It just takes the desk research, getting out there to find those groups, find those individuals. And to be honest, if we can help with, you know, today's session with ideas in chat, then hopefully that's useful too.
Oh, that would be brilliant. The other thing, I'm going to ask for some of these websites myself. The other thing, of course, I mean, we've touched on this with Dusseldorf, but go to the place you're writing about. I mean, even if it's historical, you know, if there's still a tree on the, or, you know, if there's a big, huge oak tree on the hill, maybe in 1824 it was an oak sapling, you know, no one else is necessarily going to know about that. But the more stuff you put in, the more authentic stuff you put in, the more things that you get right. First of all, it will add a sort of, no, I mean, don't overdo it, obviously. But if you do it properly, it will add a sort of richness. It will add an authenticity to the text. But also you'll just get this sense of great satisfaction. You'll think, I put that oak sapling in there and now it's a big tree. You know,
On that point, Sal, actually, CJ has said how to avoid adding too much research, especially if some of the details aren't relevant to the character.
We've
Where do you
talked
draw the
about
line?
this before. It's so easy to do all this research and then just want to shove and cram and just push it all into that book. You're going to get it all in. And of course, you mustn't do this. You just can't. And it's so heartbreaking because you've done so much research and you've got it all and you want to, but just let it inform the book. Just let it inform the story. You don't cram it all in.
The story will be richer for it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So this is, I'm really enjoying tonight's subject. Okay, my questions have temporarily frozen. Let me see. That's an interesting one. Anyway, so maybe I'll just jump ahead to a different question instead. Okay, I'm happy to research historical detail, but I find dialogue on spoken vocabulary quite difficult. There are no recordings of the 17th century. Can you give any tips on this?
There are no recordings, but there's loads of letters, there's loads of diaries. Read Pepys, read Samuel Pepys. The thing is, it's always out there. It is, honestly, even if you're talking medieval stuff, there's stuff out there, you just have to track it down. And then, as I said, if you do read Pepys, of course, you might not be writing about England, but if you do read Pepys or someone similar, you are not going to want to be recreating the way he, I've been reading a bit of Pepys recently, and what is he says? He says, up betimes. He means I get up early, up betimes, he says every morning. But what you want to do, as we just talked about earlier, is you want to give the reader what they think people talk like then. And you don't want to go overboard, you don't want to say having everyone shouting, yay, verily ye Bartlett all the time. But you want to sort of capture a sense of what people think people talk like. And readers will be very, very happy with that. But you do need to, read your Austen or read your Brontes or read your, I'm sure there's, tragically, there's in American literature, there's Walton and there's, all, Whitman and all these great authors who were writing, Emily Dickinson, who you just get a sense of the language and a sense of the time. America, especially because, you're not going back to the 14th century in America. You're going back to where things are much more recorded. So now, it is all there. You just have to look for it. You do. And then this is what I always say, then you have to do your work as an author. You have to convince us that it's authentic.
Sal, we've hit a bit of a technical issue. I can see you and we can obviously talk to each other, but I seem to have lost everything else. So there's no more chat in the chat window. And I can't, and the Q&A box is refusing to open. So I don't actually know Tom, if we're going live.
I can see the chat.
Ah, there we go. If you can see the chat, that's a great help. So as long as we know people, everyone's still there.
Let's see if I can see Q&A. I can. So shall I take the wheel, Tom?
No, because then I'm redundant, Sal. You can just do this whole thing on yourself, on your own.
Can you really not see it?
I can't see a thing. It's just a big blank box for me. I don't know.
So I'm just gonna, I don't know how you do this because you're an expert at this. I am going to just take some questions sort of in order, if that's all right.
That's fine. If
so
that's
somebody
okay.
says, what are the rules on this when it comes to different worlds? And this is what I said right at the beginning. If you are creating your own worlds, you're more or less fine to do whatever the heck you want. But what you've got to make sure is that nobody else has done it. You've got to make sure that you're not being really derivative. You've got to make sure. So in a way, you've got to do your own research, but in a slightly different way. Research of the genre, research of similar stories. That's what you need to do. But if you're creating the world, you're laughing, really.
Yeah.
Can one, in a humorous way, refer to different ethnicities without appearing racist and inviting criticism and disapproval? You better. If you're in doubt, don't do it. If you're asking the question, don't do it. It is so important to not get this wrong. So if you've got the slightest doubt about about something perfectly, that you mean in a perfectly good way might be misconstrued, do not do it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth anybody's time for you to do that. So don't leave yourself any doubt, especially with humor. Humor's really dangerous, especially written down, because when somebody's speaking, something can very obviously be a joke, and you can judge your audience when you're speaking. When you write something down, it's there in black and white forever. You can't judge your audience. People don't necessarily know your tone. So be very, very, very careful with that.
Yeah.
I cannot elaborate on academic writing requirements. I'm so sorry. That's just not my field. But I wish you the very best of luck. I
feel very mean, unable to help you out here. So.
Oh, no, you're not mean. And I can see you, and that's lovely. So somebody has said, I don't really want to use the city where I live as a location for the book. With COVID going on, I don't really want to travel. Damn right. How practical is online research for setting? It can be really good. I don't want it to sound unrealistic to a reader who might live in a different city. I might be more interested in using as a setting. So with that, if you really can't get out, and lots of Mary Renault, I'm pointing now, Mary Renault wrote about ancient Greece, several books before she ever went to Greece. And you would swear she'd grown up in ancient Greece, actually. You can do it. It's just you have to do a lot more work, and you've got to be willing to do a lot more work. And again, try and run it past somebody who lives in Birmingham before you, because they will say, oh no, that shop closed down years ago, or, the library, you can't get that bus to the library. So that's, use other people, buy them, don't just ask them, buy them a bottle of wine, buy them a cake, buy them a cake and a bottle of wine, and take them out to lunch, because it's worth it. It's really, really worth it. What's the best way to make sure you don't food your story with too many information?
Fill your story with too much information, maybe?
Mm-hmm. I think we've just sort of covered that. You've just got to be very discerning. Look at all your research. Go through your research with highlighters. Put, this color I must put in. This color will be helpful. This color I probably won't. Go through it like that. And then when you've got all the I must put ins, go through those and cut half of them.
That's a great tip.
I just made that up.
I love that. I love that. And I'm sure listeners have got other ideas as well, but that's a great one. Yeah.
Somebody says, any tips for ensuring that the common use for a word is accurate for the time? I'm sorry, because I think I can't tell when these questions were put up. Oh, I can actually, but we might be sort of overlapping. Yes, looking at diaries and letters and things, but also, again, that I think you probably can. Even Webster's, I think, will give you information like that. Dictionaries will give you good, reliable dictionaries will give you information like that if you're willing to find one. A Must-Deal dictionary. Should we be careful about trusting our own memories from childhood?
Sal, I'm just going to say, because we're getting quite short time, so probably this one and maybe one more, and then I think we may need to draw it to a close.
I'm gonna dazzle now with my speed answering. Yes, trust your own memories, but make it clear that they are your own memories. That's all.
Yeah.
All right, this is all, we've covered all of this, mainly. You see, this is, you don't do this. You just.
Well, what generally, if we've had a.
Somebody asked about jargon and stuff. Yes. There are lots of books on that. Loads of books on that.
Yeah, there's a question about someone, I think, who had an 80-year-old.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking
story.
At.
Yeah.
But this, if he's 80 years old now, my mind has gone completely blank, but they were only, they were young in the 50s. That's not so far away. So, and to a degree, people's vernacular changes as they get older. They adapt, they're not going to say, oh, that's absolutely spiffing. They will, well, not that most people use spiffing, but, you know, people's vocabulary, and through watching telly and stuff, people's vocabulary adapts and changes and that. But, you know, if you're talking about now, remember that they were young, you know, it could have been young in the swinging 60s.
Yes.
They could have been listening to Jimi Hendrix. So not, you know, not that different. What
Great. I think that's probably all of them, Sal, for the
I think it is for now. I don't know if it froze at that particular
It sounds
place.
well, yeah. There were about 9, I think, left to answer at that point. But that's great. I mean, I think
How about that?
I feel somewhat redundant. I won't be up here. You can do the next session on your own. No,
I need you because you don't go And anyway,
oh, I do. Oh, I definitely do. Well, look, Sally, fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and it's been really interesting seeing all of the shared advice that people have been contributing in chat. So thank you once again.
I would love to see some of this actually, and I think maybe you know, this is the kind of thing that I think this kind of session is so valuable for. It's a stimulant as much as anything else. It gets people sharing information, gets people thinking, and you know, I often learn things from these sessions.
So really, it's a great way of putting it. Yeah, this is absolutely is a stimulant, and
we are your stimulant of choice.
Yes. One thing I can do tomorrow perhaps is to go through the chat file, because I've seen quite a few suggestions here, and just jot those down, make a note of those, and maybe we can share those you know, as part of the next session, or even in a blog post that we put together, because I think there is a lot of useful stuff here, and it's obviously an area that people not necessarily struggle with, but you know, benefit from these kind of tips. Just some really simple things here that can make what seems an insurmountable problem you know, quite a simple problem to solve. It's all about speaking to the right people, really, and getting
you know, and doing the legwork.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the simple fact is, whatever you want to know, you will be able to find it somewhere. I promise you. I promise you. Someone else is interested in you know, what badgers did in Norfolk in 1812. I promise you. So there will be information out there, and you'll be staggered. Persevere, but be willing to do the legwork. This is very important. That's the bottom line with research. You've just got to be willing to do the work.
Okay, well, look, thank you ever so much, Sally. Lovely to have 50 minutes of your time once again. At this point, I usually say what we've got coming up next month, but my whole screen has frozen other than this window, so I can't tell you, but we will be back at some point in early December. So it should be the second Tuesday of December, the last one of the year. And yeah, thank you ever so much. Heartfelt thank you from both of us for those of you joining, contributing to another great session. Have a safe rest of the month, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Bye all.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. Bye.